Good evening. The Trump administration's recent decision to overhaul USAID has sparked significant controversy, with Elon Musk playing a key role in reshaping US foreign aid. The drastic restructuring, which saw thousands of employees placed on leave, has drawn both legal challenges and humanitarian concerns, particularly as global aid efforts face disruptions. Is this a necessary reform or a reckless dismantling of a crucial agency? Meanwhile, tensions are rising between the Trump administration and the UK over trade policies. As Prime Minister Keir Starmer navigates Trump's unpredictable foreign policy, the possibility of US tariffs on UK exports looms large. With economic and political uncertainty growing, could this mark the beginning of a US-UK trade war? Let's get in focus. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, has undergone one of the most dramatic overhauls in its history under the Trump administration. Led by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, a Musk-backed initiative, thousands of employees were placed on leave, funding was frozen, and humanitarian aid projects across the globe were disrupted. Critics argue that this move has placed countless lives at risk, while the administration claims the changes will make USAID more efficient. Legal battles and political pushback suggest otherwise. As Politico reports, the rapid dismantling of USAID has left humanitarian organizations scrambling, with many unable to continue their operations. The restructuring, led in part by Elon Musk's initiative, has raised alarm bells about the privatization of foreign aid and the future of US humanitarian efforts abroad. With USAID's fate hanging in the balance, how will these changes impact global aid, and what does this signal about the administration's broader vision for foreign policy? Joining us now is Peter Qnews, the chairman of Links Investment Advisory. Welcome back to Qnews, Mr. Qnews. So, the Trump administration USAID was inefficient and required reform. What do you make of that?
But the fact is that there is some truth to that. And frankly, the Trump administration has gleefully posted some pretty outrageous things that have been the USAID spent money on. But the other side of that coin is they're going at reform with a sledgehammer and basically destroying the entire organization because of, no doubt, some missteps that they pointed their finger at.
It does seem that there's usually a kernel of truth in a lot of these stories somewhere in there. The appointment of Elon Musk has sparked significant debate. What's your view on that? And how does his involvement fit into the administration's broader efforts to overhaul the federal government?
Well, let's talk about Elon Musk for a second. No matter what you think of him, he did not become the richest man in the world by being stupid. He is an extraordinary visionary, an extraordinary entrepreneur. The problem here is that subtlety is not his long. As I mentioned earlier, he is going at the issue bombastically. The right way to solve the USAID problem is to go in and look at where they're spending money and cut the waste where it needs to be cut. But to eliminate the entire program, which provides aid in what is known as soft power for the United States by helping people in need in other countries, has been a very, very effective diplomatic maneuver for the United States and has created strong attraction for the United States over the years. You don't destroy the entire thing because there are a few areas where it really made some questionable decisions.
So how will that impact America's global influence? And do you think that Donald Trump doesn't really see any benefit in soft power?
Well, no, yeah, that's really the question to ask, isn't it? And we don't really know the answer to that yet. Clearly, the way he's going about things doesn't suggest that he does. He would rather win. He would rather win friends and influence people by bludgeoning them, as opposed to showing them the good side of what America can do. So the jury's still out on that one.
And with USAID's funding frozen and aid programs in critical regions now at risk, where do we go from here? Do you think this is going to be a short-term thing?
I hope so. There are a number of legal issues involved here that are already being addressed. Many judges, including judges that Trump has supported, have halted some of these massive cuts that he is starting to implement, including firing, thousands of people in agencies en masse. So there are going to be some legal issues involved here that could slow this down. But the immediate effect is one of massive disruption and discord, and that clearly is not in the United States' best interests.
And let's talk about some of those employees there, and the USAID employees who have been fired and many restricted from offices and being monitored. Is that even legal? Does Elon Musk or Donald Trump have the ability to do that legally?
Well, that's precisely the legal issue that is at stake. Many will say that he does not. He, the Trump is doing a lot of these measures by so-called executive orders, which have some basis in legality, but probably not as much as the power that he is exercising and using them. So many of these measures are going to be challenged in court, and it's going to take a while for all this to unravel. But it is really not the best use of our court system or of our judicial system, or not the best use of executive power either.
And these executive orders, of course, have been used by all presidents, and the recent ones, Obama and Biden as well, but not quite at this rate. It seems like Trump has been in power for quite a long time now, and it's only been 20 days. Republicans have expressed some concerns over aid disruptions affecting American farmers. Could we likely see some of these positions on USAID being reversed as a result of economic pressures or an economic backlash?
Yeah, either that or being reversed because somebody figures out that most of the stuff that they do is needed and helps the United States. So, yes, some of them will be reversed. Let me give you an example. Um, I'm on the board of trustees of Lebanese American University in Beirut. We just had a meeting of the executive committee this morning, wondering what we're going to do about the students who are no longer being subsidized by one of the USAID programs that helps foreign students get American educations in Egypt and in Lebanon. And we have 200 students whose fate is in danger here, and we're trying to figure out some way to help them. But these are the kinds of things that are really stupid to cut because they do the United States so much good. And hopefully, there will be some people who come to their senses and start looking at this instead of eliminating entire programs, look at specifics about what is helping and what isn't.
Yes, there'll be many people in the United States itself who are probably unaware of the kind of work that the American University in Cairo or the one in Lebanon does. And there's some very worried and frightened young people who are not sure about their scholarships or their education being maintained. What would you say to those people?
I would say look at what all of this does. You mentioned AUC. AUC $1 million a year from programs of the USAID and the State Department, and that money is at risk. It's gone, and it will have a tremendous effect on the university in Cairo, as it does on the two American universities in Lebanon. We need to explain to Americans that although there were some problems in the past and some really questionable and frankly stupid grants made by USAID, you don't go after it with a sledgehammer and destroy the entire thing. There's an old expression about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and that's precisely what's happening here.
And finally then, with these legal challenges underway, just to ask you to look into your crystal ball, Mr. Qnews, what do you think? Is excuse me, is USAID's fate already sealed, or will things turn around?
Yeah, I have to try to distinguish with what I would call wishful thinking and an honest prediction. And I think splitting it down the middle, I think USAID programs will be restored in part and perhaps more slowly than we would want, but they are definitely not going to disappear forever. They have done a great service for the United States and for the people in need that we help. They have forged alliances between these countries and the United States that China and Russia will be very happy to take our place and take advantage of it. So I'm hopeful that we will get this straightened out.
Well, those words will be welcomed by many people who benefit from USAID. Thank you very much, Mr. Peter Qnews, for your insights, as always, for joining us here on Q News. The dismantling of USAID is sending shockwaves across the humanitarian sector. As legal battles continue, the world watches to see whether this restructuring will be a turning point for US foreign aid or its undoing. Now we turn growing tensions between the Trump administration and the UK over trade policies and those shifting diplomatic alliances.
Donald Trump is his name, and he's there to stay.
As unlikely, impossible, is now reality.
America powerful. We will win, win, win. And we will make America great again. Let's do our encouragement. We will very quickly make America great again.
Now, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing a new challenge: how to navigate an unpredictable relationship with Trump's administration. Trade tensions are mounting as the possibility of US tariffs on UK exports increases, adding uncertainty to an already fragile economy. Meanwhile, the rise of the Reform Party in the UK is reshaping Britain's political landscape, raising questions about the UK's future direction. With economic and political stakes high, how will Starmer balance diplomacy with economic interests? As the Financial Times reports, the UK is bracing for possible US tariffs, growing populist movements on both sides of the Atlantic. With the UK's Reform Party gaining traction and Starmer taking a cautious approach to Trump, Britain's political and economic future remains uncertain. Could the UK be facing a trade war with its closest ally? Joining us here on Q News now is Greg Swenson, the chairman of the Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you very much for joining us here, Mr. Swenson. So, Trump's second term has already shaken things internationally with relations with other countries especially. How do you see Trump's approach to the UK compared to his first term?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it'll be similar to the first term. President Trump is very fond of the UK. He's always been on the UK's side, whereas during the Biden years, you had a president who was very much, sometimes critical of the UK, but also in many respects, favoring the EU, favoring Ireland, and on occasion even disrespecting the leadership here in the UK. So I think the President Trump coming back into office will be ultimately better for the UK, and I think you'll see that. Without, again, there'll be some hiccups, and I think that given that, the leadership in the UK is from a party of the left, and President Trump's, party from the right, there might be some missteps, but I think generally speaking, President Trump very much favors the UK.
And you mentioned Trump being fond of the UK. I think his mum was Scottish. I think that's right.
That's right. Yeah.
And also he has a golf course in Scotland, so that shows his affection for the UK. So how serious are these risks of new tariffs on UK exports, would you say?
Yeah, my guess at this point is it's not very serious, and there's a few reasons for that. One, we've already talked about his fondness for the UK. Two is the UK doesn't have any real, risks of, allowing illegal migrants into the US like we had with Canada and Mexico. You don't have a problem of not committing enough resources to defense and security. The UK is at about 2.5% of GDP. That's, significantly higher than Germany and France, but also higher than the average in the EU or in NATO specifically. And the third thing, and this is probably the most important, is right now the UK has a very small trade surplus with the US. So it's not meaningful, whereas the EU has a $230 billion trade surplus. China is at around 300 billion, and of course Canada and Mexico had significant trade surpluses. So I don't think the president has any reason to slap tariffs on the UK. There might be some small things like the Chagos Islands, which is really a disaster. If that goes forward, I hope the president stops that. So there's some things on the margin, but generally speaking, the issues that would trigger President Trump to slap tariffs on, like you saw with the threats on Canada and Mexico, of course on Colombia, and potentially on the EU, I don't think those really rank in terms of the UK.
So let's talk about the Reform Party. This is a relatively new. It was UKIP, led by a very charismatic leader called Nigel Farage, who was very close to President Trump. I think it's probably the nearest to your party, the Republican Party in the UK. What are the parallels and differences between Farage's movement in the UK and Trump's party?
I think it's more similarities than differences. So the Reform Party here in the UK has really argued for moving back to traditional conservative values. And I think the so-called Conservative Party, the Tories, have not. They have not governed in their 14 years of power. They sort of governed from the center, even the center left in many respects, not the center right. So I think, Nigel Farage, who's full disclosure, a friend of mine, I think he's got a great relationship with President Trump, but also his party is aligned with the policies of President Trump. I would also say that the Conservative Party, the Tories, have a choice to make right now. I think they're moving much to the right, and they're moving toward President Trump's policies. They're reaching out to the administration. So I don't think this is going to be a big conflict or a demonstration of massive differences between Reform and the Conservatives. If the Conservatives choose to move back to the center left, like we had with David Cameron and Theresa May and Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, I think that they risk losing a lot of ground to reform if they move to the right, which I think they're doing. And I've, with both the co-chairman of the Conservative Party as well as the official leader of the party, which is Kemi Badenoch, I think direction. So you could only see a real moving, powerful force of the right-leaning parties here.
Yeah, an alignment. And let me ask you, I wasn't aware that you're a close friend of Nigel Farage, who's the leader of the Reform Party and a member of Parliament. There has been talk of the Conservative Party doing a deal with the Reform Party to make Nigel Farage the leader of the Conservative Party and the next UK Prime Minister. Do you think there's any chance of that happening, and do you think Farage will be up for that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's hard for me to speculate, and I'm close with both Reform and the Tories. I think ultimately that would be a good idea. It might be a little early for that. And because they have 3 or 4 years, actually 4.5 years until the next election. So I think there's plenty of time to work on that. There are people working on the sidelines like Ben Habib who are very tied into both parties and I think could do a good job, uniting the right-leaning parties here. If not, they'll have an election where there's a natural alliance in terms of two parties forming a coalition. And the Tories, have a lot in common. So I think there are probably fewer differences than there are similarities in the parties right now. And again, I think the Conservative Party is moving to the right for sure. I encourage that, and Reform has actually done a good job of leading that move or that movement. You're seeing it in France. We've already seen it in Italy, obviously. We're seeing it in Germany. So I think there's a real movement to the right in Europe in general. And in the UK, in spite of having a Labour government, probably for the next 4.5 years, I think there's a real opportunity as these parties coalesce around common sense, the common sense revolution, the end of DEI, the end of climate alarmism. I think there's a lot of movement amongst the voters. Which party ends up being in control is probably, I think many of us are indifferent to that.
Well, let's go on to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer himself, a leader of the Labour Party, a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He's been very cautious in tiptoeing his way through trying to handle Donald Trump. He was in Europe, in the EU a few days ago and was asked about Donald Trump. He said, I'm not going to answer questions about Trump. You can't get more cautious than that. What do you make of the way that he's trying to navigate these difficult relationships like the one with Trump?
Yeah, I think he's got a challenge. It's hard, it's difficult. He's trying to work both sides. He's trying to work with the EU and work with the US. I think that's, obviously challenging. But I think what he should keep in mind is when he's with the diplomatic types in the EU, when he's with the leadership in the EU, that's a very left-leaning, sort of metropolitan elite crowd. And of course, he's got to tiptoe around that. But what he should keep in mind is that the voters in those countries, in much of the EU, are moving to the right. And it's very delicate where he's got to, obviously have some loyalty to his party, the Labour Party here in the UK and the Labour government. But the trend is not his friend right now. And I think he's got to be careful about that and sort of pay attention. I would call it read the room, because the voters do not want the things that he's advocating. The voters want the borders closed, and again, much of the same in Europe, and you're seeing that. But also, they don't really. The obsession with climate is waning for sure, and so I think he's better off reading the room. But I understand that it's a difficult task right now, working with the leadership in the EU as well as the leadership in the US. They're on different pages. It's going to be a delicate balance for him.
Well, let's bring it to the power behind the throne. If you believe Time magazine. I think we're just about out of time. I wanted to get onto Elon Musk And I think we might just be out of time, unfortunately.
Yeah, next time.
Next time. Thank you very much for being here with us on the program. Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you very much for being here with us. Now, as Starmer seeks to maintain stability, Trump's trade policies and the rise of populism could reshape Britain's political and economic future. Time will tell. The Trump administration's overhaul of USAID has sparked legal and humanitarian concerns, raising questions about the privatization of foreign aid and America's global role. And the tensions between the US and UK continue to grow, and trade policies and political shifts are complicating an already uncertain relationship. What comes next? Stay with In Focus for more updates and analysis. I'm Mark Summers. Good night.